What's going on, YouTube? We're back at it for another video. Today, well, we've got another one of those best-in-slot loadouts when it comes to facing off with the Terminate. Now, with the most recent war bond, with the cutting edge, we got the Arc 12 Blitzer. And so I thought to myself, why not make an entire electric build out of this, one that I like to call the dark side of democracy, in which you will become Super Earth's very own Emperor Palpatine, wielding the Arc power and force that will be quite devastating, even to those other Darth Liberators you have around you. Every Helldiver will fear to be in the front of your presence, or even off to the sides of your enemies. But from their charred bodies, we will reign triumphant. And if you're a little too wild with it, you might get kicked. But that's a statement for a different time. But in all seriousness, I ended up trying to build out a full electric build that I was going to make as like a meme type of build, just for the stream to have a little bit of fun and just play around with it, running around like I'm Emperor Palpatine, just slinging those arcs everywhere I went. And it ended up actually working out a whole lot better than I thought it would. Now, previous to this, I had already used the arc thrower before and I knew of its power, but I didn't realize how powerful it could be if you actually synergized a bunch of stratagems just to complement the arc thrower specifically, and not only be something that can take down any enemy from small all the way to the most heavily armored, but be something that could almost completely solo bug breaches and be able to hold it down with relative ease. The power with this loadout is quite crazy, and within the right hands can control crowds, bug breaches, and even the mightiest of Bile Titans, and make them bend the knee to the empire of that of Super Earth. But that being said, let's get straight into the loadout. Now, coming up first, obviously, we have the Arc Thrower, the main piece of the entire build, even though the Blitzer seems like it should have been, but the Blitzer ends up just being an accompanying, complementing type of weapon towards that of the Arc Thrower. And we'll get to why that is a little bit later on when we talk about the weapons that will work with this loadout. But with the Arc Thrower, you're going to be the master of crowd control. Taking out crowds is going to be quite easy for you, and I will always suggest this be the main focus of this weapon, as no doubt it has become easier for you to take down chargers, considering their head health has been decreased with one of our recent patches, and now, yes, it does actually take it down quite a bit faster if you do aim for the face, and sometimes you'll get them down before even having to say Olay if you're pretty good at being able to get off those arcs with those half charges after your full charge hit. If you can nail them in quick succession, and if you've got a good bit of distance while they're running at you to aim at that head, it will be quite easy to let them pull between the arcs of your electricity. But that being said, if you've got somebody on the team with an EAT 17, allow them to be able to one-shot that, and you maintain those crowds so that way that your team has the capability of still maintaining even during the middle of bug breaches or main objectives. As the most dangerous thing we have to face off with right now is not of that of the Bile Titans or the Chargers, but of the Hunters and the Warriors, those little ticks that start coming out, or even worse, the Bile Spewers. But with the Arc Thrower, you'll be able to wrangle these crowds and whip them with your electric arcs, forcing them to their knees. But something also to note about this weapon when it comes down to taking down Bile Titans. Somehow, some way, I still don't know how, I was able to take down a Bile Titan in just 2 shots. Now, 3 times I can guarantee I got it between 1 and 3 shots, and I don't know what's happening there. I can't repeat it. I've tried aiming above their head, right where their ears should be, or underneath their chin, and there's just moments where somehow it arcs through their body and it'll tear off pieces of armor on their back and on their head, and it'll just rip through them and do devastating damage. I don't know if it's just RNG when it comes to the overall damage of the arc, or how I'm charging it, or where I'm aiming it, or possibly even how it's arcing through that body and then going to the next target behind it. But let me know down in the comments below if you've ever done this, or if you know any science to how this could be possible consistently, because it is absolutely devastating. I couldn't believe it when I saw one of these Bile Titans spawn in front of me, and then within 2 arcs, I just dropped it. It was amazing. Nothing felt better than that power, but I sadly enough couldn't recreate it. But overall, it's still something to talk about, considering when it comes down to taking a stratagem and damaging that Bile Titan, the Arc Thrower can be something that ends up cleaning up those Bile Titans after they've had significant damage from other sources, such as something like the rail cannon, the rocket pods, or even a slightly missed 500 kg from the Eagle. In these moments, the Arc Thrower is fantastic for cleanup duty at dealing the additional damage required to take down those Bile Titans. But again, remain focused on those crowds, and then take down that Bile Titan, as the number one focus is maintaining the capability of not getting overrun by these crowds for the rest of your team with the Arc Thrower. Cannot stress it enough, and at that same time, do keep in mind that if any teammates are somewhere off to the left, right, or even just in between you and that enemy, even if they're outside of your aim, the Arc Thrower is a powerful force that is almost uncontrollable. Its power is unruly. But that is the dark side of democracy, as there is no doubt that that teammate more than likely should not have been in your way as you were taking care of every enemy in front of you. They should have known not to get in your way, and we'll always make that statement every single time, and sometimes, you know, you'll end up killing the host if you're joined in SOS and maybe they'll kick you, but they should have known better than getting in front of your arc. Now, right after that, we've got the EMS Mortar Sentry, which this is going to be all about being able to maintain power when it comes to facing off with those bug breaches and holding down objectives. You want to make sure that as soon as you see bug breach coming up or imminent, whenever that's popping up on your screen, you want to look for a location away from where that orange smoke is going. You basically want to do a 180 from wherever that smoke is coming up from, or wherever that bug breach is coming up. Find a spot that's a little bit tucked off and then throw down one of these sentries. That way, as soon as those bugs start coming out of that breach, EMS is going to start dropping directly on top of it. This is going to help in slowing down those enemies at advancing to your team, or possibly this is going to help stop those enemies in their tracks. They won't be able to advance from that bug breach, and this can be extremely powerful, especially when you've got a multitude of those hunters coming out, and on top of that, chargers in the same moment. And this is where you can truly capitalize with that Arc Thrower and be able to just have everything tightly grouped together and just start wildly arcing into that. Whether or not the charger's in there or not, you will be dealing damage across the entire crowd, maintaining that they stay in that one location and just completely obliterating them. Having basically a giant field day to just cook up a bunch of bugs with every arc that you have, making bug breaches almost seem like a trivial event in some moments, and overall making it a whole lot easier to get some of these main objectives done. Overall, you can't go wrong with the EMS Mortar, as it's going to slow the advance of those enemies, keeping them slow, docile, and easy targets for you to clean up with that Arc Thrower. Coming up right after that, we've got the Tesla Tower, which is a bit of an interesting one as it does quite a lot of damage. Still not something I would say is fantastic for facing off with the automatons, but it can be pretty useful on bug breaches. Now, one thing to keep in mind though is when you do see a bug breach, I would highly suggest throwing it off to the left or the right side of the bug breach and not directly in the center of the bug breach. As what I found out very easily is that sometimes a lot of people like to throw their ordnance or stratagems down directly on top of the bug breach itself, so I have wasted more than a few of these Tesla towers. Honestly, there's a lot of times where the Tesla tower didn't even get to show its true power for me because I just threw it in immediately trying to basically hold down that bug breach, and then somebody else is like, let me just drop a 500 kg in there. The amount of times it just got blown up instantly was ridiculous. You don't even need it for the build, but it can complement the build quite well. But that states enough about how strong the build can be by itself. But another reason you don't want to throw it directly into the middle of the bug breach, even if you've communicated with teammates not to throw their stratagems directly on the initial bug breach so that the Tesla tower can actually survive, is the simple fact that if you are using the Arc Thrower can actually arc to the Tesla tower and destroy it. This is a thing that would happen quite often with me. I noticed it after a few times, and if you throw it directly behind the enemies or even close enough to the point where it can arc directly from those enemies to the Tesla tower, you can basically turn it into a wasted stratagem, which is why you'd want to throw it off to the left or the right of the bug breach. That way it's close enough to have its own arcs to start to cast into those actual terminid that are coming out of the bug breach, as it does do devastating damage. It can clean up quite a few of those terminid, and if you can somehow basically create a choke point to where not only are the bugs coming out, but they're getting hit by the EMS, so they're getting stopped in their tracks. So we're hitting them with the Arc Thrower on the right side, and then from the left side or the right side from that, you've also got that Tesla tower arcing over, so you're double arcing, you're getting multitudes of enemies, you're really churning through those crowds pretty efficiently. if you can get this set up properly. That's the big issue with it. But overall, this can be something that truly benefits at locking down some of those bug breaches, on top of that of the arc thrower and the EMS. Coming up right after that, we've got the last stratagem for this, and that's going to be the 500 kg bomb. Now, this one is purely for the simple fact that we are not an absolute destroyer of Bile Titans. You really can't go wrong with at least having one type of like massive single target damage stratagem, and generally, I just don't use the 500 kg all that often, but I ended up using it for this build just to have a little bit of fun. I wanted that big boom, and if you can work around just trying to get this one lined up properly, it's going to be devastating towards those Bile Titans. And even if it misses slightly and it doesn't completely destroy the Bile Titan, the Arc Thrower is the perfect compensator for this, considering we'll be able to clean up those Bile Titans by just throwing a couple more of those arcs into them right after that explosion, and just cleaning things up fairly easily. And on top of that, you can use it for a multitude of other things, like just clearing up things in general, or just having a good bit of fun by throwing this right at the extraction before getting on the ship, and then flying away with that big boom. But that being said, let's talk about some of those other replacements that you could use as well that may be a little bit more consistent than that of the 500 kg. If you had something like the 110mm rocket pods, this can do half the health of a Bile Titan in just one go. So if you throw this, just one of them, you'll have 3 uses of this if you've got the ship modules fully upgraded. So you'll have 3 chances to possibly hit 3 different Bile Titans and then clean them up with that arc thrower. This can be an excellent strategy. But on top of that, you could also go with something along the lines of the orbital rail cannon strike if you were looking for something that just instantly locks onto that target, and even if it doesn't destroy it, we will be able to clean it up with that of the arc thrower. So these are great options to possibly slot this in. And when it comes down to the overall usefulness of the Tesla Tower, this is something that I will say could possibly be slotted out. A lot of times there were moments where I wasn't able to utilize this, and it was just something that would complement the build every once in a while, but you could actually slot something like the Guard Dog Rover or the Shield Generator Pack to really complement the overall Arc Thrower gameplay style, as considering with having the 500 kg, we've got that for just taking out those large crowds, and the Arc Thrower along with the EMS is pretty much all you need to really corral those crowds efficiently, and gaining a little bit more survivability or a little bit of help from something like the Guard Dog Rover, giving you even more of that crowd control capability, can be fairly useful to you and just increase your overall survivability and clearing power. Now when it comes to your primary weapon, I use the Arc 12 Blitzer, but I'm going to be real, this is not exactly the greatest primary weapon. It's not exactly bad either, but there are a multitude of times where the simple fact that this has a slow rate of fire and doesn't always arc to multitudes of enemies, it can be a bit of a troublesome primary weapon if you're trying to rely on this. Probably one of the best things about the Arc Blitzer when it came to utilizing it with this build is when anything got a little bit too close into my face, I was able to switch weapons, dive back, and then just hit the trigger while looking in the general direction of this enemy, and that would be able to actually eliminate some of those hunters that had jumped into my face fairly quickly. This doesn't always get the one-shot capability with hunters, sadly enough. It does feel like it has a little bit of that inconsistency when it comes to the overall damage output of something like the Arc Thrower, but in general it can be useful for this build, and if you're looking to just go for that full Emperor Palpatine, trust me, it's worth it for a good bit of fun. But in general, I would say one of the number one issues that I have with this is the simple fact that even if you do hip fire with it or just ADS, it's just not arcing to a multitude of enemies very often. It will almost feel like it's just hitting single targets way more than it should be, sadly enough. And in those instances when you do face off with something like a Stalker, it can be extremely problematic, considering even if it does have stagger damage to it, the slow rate of fire basically makes it to where that stagger only works for a brief second against something like a Stalker and doesn't actually benefit you at holding them back before they're able to get in close enough and do their little tongue tendril thing and throw you back. So for those moments, you may be better off utilizing something like the Punisher or the Slugger to be able to have something to quickly switch over to when things are directly in your face, but still have that capability of also having that stagger and pushback that's going to be helpful for facing off with Stalkers or some of those medium bug type enemies, as well as overall having that capability of having clearing power of destroying some of those enemies that may be just clustering on top of you fairly quickly, which is what I wish the Blitzer would be capable of doing, but it just doesn't have a massive amount of crowd controlled capability to it, especially with how slow the rate of fire is. Even if it does end up arcing to multiple enemies, it's not going to be an even distribution of 250. But at the same time, it is still up to your personal preference. Choose whatever primary fits you best when it comes to playing with a loadout like this, as any one of these primary weapons could accompany the arc thrower and this loadout and still work just as fine. Now when it comes to your grenade, I would suggest the G23 stun, as this is going to be something that is going to be extremely beneficial. If you haven't used this yet, or if you haven't even unlocked it just yet, this is a very powerful grenade, considering it can also stun something like a Bile Titan. So in moments when you may be facing off with that Bile Titan, you've got that 500 kg ready, you throw it just underneath them, and then you throw that G23 stun grenade to guarantee that they're going to sit there still until that 500 kg comes in. Something like this stun grenade can be a powerful implementation when it comes to being able to compensate for something like 100% call-in time, being able to guarantee to stop that Bile Titan in its tracks, or even be able to corral a crowd of those Terminid that are coming towards you, as this has a massive blast radius to it that will be able to affect a ton of enemies, including chargers along with the rest of the crowd. Or if everything's all piled together, you'll get the Bile Titan, the chargers, and the crowd just within that radius, and then you can just wildly start throwing those arcs, throwing your stratagems in, and just have easy pickings when it comes to facing off with some of those Terminid. But you also can't go wrong with something like the G16 Impact, especially if you're facing off with those bloaty bugs, as the arc thrower will do some work to them, but it will not be as fast as just throwing in one of these grenades and being able to pop them pretty quickly, especially if they're all clustered together. One well-placed impact grenade can pop the entire group. And when it comes down to armor, you really can't go wrong with something like the X16 Prototype 16, getting that 95% resistant to arc damage. I would only use this if you're technically using the Tesla Tower. If you take the Tesla Tower out of this build, I wouldn't say this is a necessary armor set to actually work with. And if you aren't using the Tesla Tower, then I would highly suggest using something like the engineering kit, where you can further increase your capacity for your grenades by 2, whether you're using something like the stun grenades to be able to also stun lock some of those enemies, especially when it comes to Bile Titans. But obviously this is going to be up to your personal preference as to what you would prefer to use. But that's going to be the loadout right there, people. That's going to be the Dark Side of Democracy Emperor Palpatine build that is all about that arc damage. And I'm telling you, that arc thrower compensated by the EMS and throwing in with that Tesla, along with being able to just drop in more than a few of those 500 kgs, can be a whole lot of fun and be extremely effective at locking down some of those bug breaches and maintaining those objective locations. You're going to be the perfect crowd control as well as single target type of Helldiver, and it is going to be quite crazy how easily you'll be able to basically face off with 95% of pretty much everything that's thrown at you. Now you may need to change a few things depending on the mission you're going on, as something like a Blitz mission may not require something like the Tesla Tower. You may want to throw in something like an Eagle Airstrike just to be able to close up some of those bug holes, but overall you should have everything you need to make it through just about any one of those missions, all the way up to Helldive difficulty when it comes to facing off with the Terminid. But let me know down in the comments below, how are you enjoying some of the new weapons, especially when it comes to the Blitzer? I'm still a little bit on the fence about it, but overall, when it comes down to throwing that arc, let me know about your experiences and what might be your combinations to empower that arc thrower itself. What are some of those loadouts that you've been using when it comes to the arc thrower and throwing out some of that Emperor Palpatine lightning? Let me know down in the comments below. But if you'd like to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button, and if you'd like to see some of this content live, hit that link down in the description below. Follow me over at Twitch. We'll be streaming daily, and on that note, have a good one.